Thank you so much for tuning in to Learn Linux TV, your source for Linux-related fun and learning. I love producing Linux-related content for you, but I can't do it alone. If the content on this channel has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting Learn Linux TV. And one of the ways that you could do that is by becoming a patron, which will give you access to exclusive perks. Also, be sure to check out my latest book, Mastering Ubuntu Server 4th Edition. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe. New content is uploaded each and every week. Thank you so much for your support, I really appreciate it. Now, let's get started with today's video. Raspberry Pi, such a great platform. These small computers are much more powerful than anything I had 10 years ago, and you can use them for all kinds of things, from a desktop computer to building your own IoT devices. It's just such a great platform that's a lot of fun to work with. But you have to start somewhere, right? And more specifically, when it comes to flashing the SD card, how do you go about that? The SD card on a Raspberry Pi is basically its main storage device where your operating system goes. So we need a way to download an operating system image and transfer it to that SD card, so that way our Pi can actually boot up. But there's multiple methods that we can use to flash an SD card for use with the Raspberry Pi. So which method should we use? Well, in this video, I'm going to go over several different methods that we can use to flash SD cards for use with the Raspberry Pi. I'll show you the process on macOS, Windows, and Linux as well. And at the end of the video, since a lot of you guys have asked me, I'm going to show you the DD command that I use personally when I go to flash a Raspberry Pi SD card. And to make it even easier, what I'm going to do is include some time codes down in the description below this video, so that way you can go to the section that is most relevant to your scenario. Anyway, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first solution that I want to cover in today's video is Raspberry Pi Imager. It's actually an official solution from Raspberry Pi, and it lets you, well, what else would it let you do? It lets you set up an SD card for use with the Raspberry Pi, and they have a version available for multiple operating systems, which actually makes it a great thing to start with. And what you're seeing right now on the screen is a screen capture from one of my Linux laptops running Ubuntu. And in my browser right here, I've actually pulled up the download page for Raspberry Pi Imager, as you can see right here. Now for me, it's actually detected the fact that I'm running Ubuntu. So on your end, when you go to this page, it should actually detect the operating system that you're running. But even if it doesn't really matter, because we have a download link right here for Windows as well as macOS. But anyway, since I'm here on my Linux install, I may as well just show you the process in Linux. And of course, I'll show you the process on other operating systems as well, but let's go ahead and download it. And as you can see, it downloaded very quickly. So what I'll do is click this icon right here just to show it in the folder. And then we see my download. So on Ubuntu, all I should have to do to install this is right click on it. And then I can click Open with Other Application. I'm going to open it with the Software Install app, which is normally the default. I don't understand why it isn't in this case. This is a vanilla installation of Ubuntu. And when it comes to most Linux distros, you should only need to double click on this. But I digress. For whatever reason, the software install app is not the default in Ubuntu 22.04 when I went to install it, but that's fine. I just right clicked on it, and then I chose to open it with another application. And here it is. So I'll select that one. And what that did was that brought up this install page right here for Raspberry Pi Imager. So I'll click Install. I'll type in my password. And now it's installed. This trash can icon here on Ubuntu is what I can click on if I want to remove it. But I'm going to close that for now. And what I should be able to do is open up my application menu and see if it's installed. And here it is. Here's the Raspberry Pi Imager. So I'll click on it and it's open. Now I will be showing you guys the full process of using Raspberry Pi Imager to flash an SD card for use with the Raspberry Pi. But before I get to that, what I want to do is make sure those of you that are using macOS or Windows aren't left out. Let's see the install process on those platforms as well. And more specifically, what I'm going to do is jump over to a Windows install, and I'll show you the process of installing the Raspberry Pi Imager on Windows. And here we are. So what I'm going to do is open up a web browser here. So I'll just open up Firefox. So what I'll do is just go to that same page, and it should actually detect my operating system as Windows. Let's see. So here we are, and then I'll scroll down and check it out. It detected my operating system on this device as Windows. So I'll click on that. That's going to start the download process. So let's open it up. Let's click install. And that should be all there is to it. In fact, here it is. So now that I've shown you the process of installing this app on Windows, let's see what it looks like on macOS. So here on macOS, it's pretty much the same thing. We just go to the same exact website that I've already shown you. And when we scroll down, we can see that right there, it automatically defaulted to macOS for the download. So I'll simply click on that. And then I'll allow that site to download information. And it should already be done. So let's open that up. So when you open it up, it's going to look something like this. So what you'll do is just drag the Raspberry Pi Imager into the Applications folder. And it should be as simple as that. So let's go in there. And then we'll look for the app in the list, and here it is. So I'll double click on that. We'll open it up. And here it is. It looks pretty much exactly the same as it does on Ubuntu as well as Windows. It's the same app, but it's here on macOS. So regardless of which of these major operating systems you happen to use, then the Raspberry Pi Imager has you covered. So now that we have Raspberry Pi Imager installed, let's go ahead and see what it's like to flash an SD card with this app. So at this point, just insert the SD card into your computer or card reader. But before you actually start, just keep in mind, and this probably goes without saying, that you will lose everything on that SD card. So if the SD card came from your camera, download all of your pictures, video, whatever you might have, because everything is going to be completely wiped out on that SD card, and we'll be dedicating it for the purpose of Raspberry Pi. So I've already inserted my SD card. So what we're going to do is choose the operating system that we want to load onto that SD card. There's actually several different operating systems or distributions of Linux that we can use with the Raspberry Pi. So we'll choose the OS. By default, we have Raspberry Pi OS. That's the primary or most popular distribution or operating system for the Raspberry Pi. So you can absolutely choose that if that's what you want to go with. There's other versions as well. So if I click on that, we have the Lite version, which is basically going to have basically no desktop environment or GUI at all. So if your Pi is going to be more of a headless server, then this is probably the best option for you. We also have a version with recommended applications as well, which is probably the one that I recommend most of you go with. But we also have a 64-bit version as well. So if you have a Raspberry Pi with a lot more memory than most, you might want to go with that version. We also have legacy versions as well. Anyway, I'll go back to the main menu. And then here we have other distributions of Linux that we can go with. Manjaro and Ubuntu are great choices. I like both of those. So I'll let you explore that if you wish to use one of those. We also have some operating systems that are more focused for playing media. So if I click on that, we have LibreElec, we have OSMC, and also Volumio, which is really fun. I actually have a Volumio Pi as well. I have quite a bit of music on there. It's essentially a jukebox. So if you want to transform your Raspberry Pi into a jukebox, then absolutely check out Volumio. It's really cool. So what I'm going to do is choose the version of the operating system that I recommend most of you choose. which is actually going to be an alternative version of Raspberry Pi OS. I'm not sure why it's not here in the main menu, but I digress. The one I recommend for most of you is this one right here. Let me scroll down and center that a bit. But this particular version, the version with the desktop environment and recommended applications, is going to be one of the better general purpose operating systems for the Pi. It'll give you a desktop environment, basically a GUI, and it's also going to give you some additional software. So you can expect to find a web browser and some other things like text editors and whatnot. So with this version, you'll have a lot more options in terms of what software is pre-installed. If you don't like that kind of thing and you would rather have a minimal version or something that doesn't have as many applications pre-installed, then of course you could just go with the default right here, which is going to also include a desktop environment, but not nearly as many applications. Anyway, what I'll do is just choose the one that I've recommended. So I'll click on that. Now, if you also chose Raspberry Pi OS as your operating system of choice, then what you'll want to do is make sure that you click on this gear icon right here. And what this is going to allow us to do is further customize the operating system before we flash it to the SD card. The first thing we can do, if we want to, is set the host name. You don't have to do this, but if you already know the purpose for your Raspberry Pi, you could just check this box right here. You could give it a name, and then that name will be applied as the host name when it comes to the final installation. You can also enable SSH as well if you plan on using that, but more importantly, what we definitely want to do is set the username and password. If we don't do that, then, well, we can't log into the Raspberry Pi. We need to have a user. It used to be the case that there was a default user for Raspberry Pi, but now the preferred method is to set your username right here. So what I'll do is just use the username J, and then I'll set the password as well. And that should be good enough for that. If you plan on using Wi-Fi with your Raspberry Pi, then you can set your Wi-Fi information right here. You could check this box. You could type your network name here, and then you can type in the password for your wireless network. Now, I'm going to leave this unchecked in my case, but I just wanted you to be aware that that option is available in this menu. Now, something that I highly recommend that you configure is this right here, the locale settings. It's auto-detected mine, and this will make sure that your location settings are correct in the installed version of Raspberry Pi OS. Now, on my end, I'll just cancel out of this menu right here because this is just a demo. I'm not actually going to use this SD card. But just make sure that you go into this menu if your distribution of choice is Raspberry Pi OS. Now, other distributions won't need this, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that if you want to use Raspberry Pi OS, that you have to actually customize at least the username and password within that menu. And then we can choose the SD card that we want to install this onto. In my case, I'm actually using a USB card reader, so I'll insert that right now. So what I'll do is just go here to choose storage. I'll choose the SD card, and then I'll click write. But once I do, again, everything is going to be wiped out. If you're okay with that, then go ahead and proceed. So I'll say yes, and I'll type in my super secret password. And it's going through the process. So what I'll do is just let this continue, and then I'll be right back as soon as it's done. And now the process is complete. The SD card has now been imaged with Raspberry Pi OS, and if I insert it into a Raspberry Pi and power it on, then it should boot right up. So anyway, I'll click continue, and that should be all there is to it. Now, a lot of people have actually asked me how I flash SD cards, and personally I don't use tools like this because I like the DD command, but the DD command is a bit more advanced. You could absolutely use it, you just have to be careful if you do use that command, and the DD command is specific to Linux, so this only goes for those of you that are running Linux as your daily driver like me. But anyway, since you guys have actually asked me multiple times how to use the DD command to accomplish the same thing, well, it's time to show you. So back here on my Linux install, I've already opened up a terminal, and I've also inserted my SD card as well. So let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is run the lsblk command. And what this command will do for us is it's going to show us all of the storage devices that are attached to our Linux system, which will include any SD cards that you might have inserted. And right here, I have device SDA and also NVMe 0 and 1. Now, in my case, the NVMe drive is actually my internal storage, so I want to make sure that I don't reference NVMe 0 and 1 at all when I run these commands, because if I did, I'd be wiping out my entire operating system. And that's actually why the dd command is considered advanced, because if you aren't careful, you can actually wipe the wrong device. And yes, I have done that before, and it's not a fun day. But as long as we're careful, then it should be totally fine. So what we want to do is identify which of these devices is the SD card that we want to work with. In my case, it's narrowed down pretty quickly because I already know that my internal hard drive is actually something in the vicinity of 500 gigs. So we know it's not the last one. And I also knew that because, well, again, NVMe is going to be my internal storage. So in my case, that only leaves SDA. Now on the SDA device, I have two partitions, SDA1 and SDA2. Now I've used this SD card with Raspberry Pi OS in the past, which is why you're seeing these two partitions, boot and root FS. And those are the typical default partitions that you'll get after you flash the SD card. But the thing is, since we see mount points on the right-hand side, which will look similar to you like it does for me, where it shows /media/J, in my case that's my username, and then /boot, and also there's one for rootfs. The very presence of those mount points means that the SD card is mounted. Now you can actually start using DD right now, and it might work. And the reason why I say it might work is because best practice is to first unmount those particular partitions first before we continue. So what we could do, and by the way, don't follow along with me, I'm actually going to show you what you shouldn't do, but what you might think is the right thing to do in normal circumstances. You might think that the process for unmounting is to open up the file manager and clicking the eject buttons right here next to the device. And normally that is the correct thing to do if you're removing the SD card, but that's not what we're doing. The thing is, if you click an eject button in a desktop environment, it's going to completely remove the storage device from the system, but we want to work with it. We don't want it to be completely removed. So what do? Well, actually what we do is we do this in the terminal, because if we do, we'll still have access to the device even after we unmount it. And by unmounting it, we're just making sure that nothing's using it, which could interfere with writes. So what I'll do is I'll run sudo umount, and that's short for unmount, but the absence of the N is actually intentional. And what we'll do is we will run that against the first partition. In my case, it's /dev/SDA, and it's partition number 1. So I want to unmount that, and I'll type in my password. And then we're going to repeat this for SDA2. And my password should be cached. It won't ask me again. But anyway, I'll press enter. And now, if I run lsblk again, we can see that the SD card is still attached. I mean, we see it right there. We see SDA, that's our device. And then we have SDA1 and SDA2, our partitions. But notice that mount points, there's nothing underneath that. That's because it's not mounted. Now, if we were to actually use the eject icon within the file manager, the GUI file manager, then in this case, lsblk won't even see a device we could work with, and the dd command won't be able to see it either. Anyway, what we'll do is switch over to a browser because we need to actually download the Raspberry Pi OS image, or whatever the image is that you're downloading. There's many, like I mentioned earlier. What we're going to do is navigate to raspberrypi.com, and then we'll click on software. And here we have the exact same site that we've been downloading from previously. But what I want to do is actually utilize the manual process. So I'll click right here. And then we have the download links to Raspberry Pi. If we scroll down, we can see some descriptions here. So what I'm going to do is just download this version right here just to keep it kind of simple. It's a smaller download. It'll just happen quicker, and I'm a little impatient today. So I'll click on that, and it's going to immediately start downloading. So I'll give that a moment to finish, and then I'll be right back. And now it's done. And then we can continue the process in the terminal. So if I list the storage of the downloads directory, we actually have the Raspberry Pi image right there. It's an XZ format. So what I recommend that we do is uncompress this first. That's what XZ is. It's kind of like a zip file format or a compressed archive format. We want to actually uncompress that. And in order to do that, we will need the onXZ command. So I'll type which and then onXZ. This will just tell me whether or not that command exists on the system here. And it does. So that means that onXZ actually comes with Ubuntu, which is good to know. So it's already built in. We should be able to run it. So I'll type onXZ. And then the path to the downloaded image file, this one right here, I'll press enter. And this might take a few minutes, so I'll just let this finish. And it's actually done. Now, a side note here, not all of the image files that you can download for Raspberry Pi are going to be XZ compressed. So this was more of a one-off. But anyway, if I list the storage of the downloads directory again, we can see that we have that same file there, but it's missing the .xz extension at the end, which is exactly what we wanted. So let's go ahead and flash the SD card with the dd command. Again, it's SDA in my case. That's actually my device name. So what I'll do is run sudo and then dd and then if for input file. It's the image file in this case. So what we'll do is point it to the Raspberry Pi download that we should already have. That one right there, and then we'll type OF. That is for output file. We're going to set that equal to, in my case, /dev/SDA, and it's not going to be SDA1, and it's also not going to be SDA2, but just SDA. SDA refers to the entire device, while 1 refers to the first partition, 2 refers to the second partition, but we don't want to image a partition, we want to image the entire SD card, so we're going to omit the partition number in this case. And we also want to make sure that we're targeting the proper device, because again, you could wipe out your entire operating system if you're not careful with the dd command. We'll set a block size for, let's say, 4 megabytes. So what I'll do is press enter. And that's actually it. Anyway, when the process is finished, it's just going to go back to the command prompt. It's not actually going to show a confirmation message or anything like that. And as soon as it does that, you can disconnect the SD card from your computer, and you should be good to go. And that was the final example in today's video. I showed you guys the process of flashing an SD card for use with the Raspberry Pi, and I showed you 2 different methods. The first method was the Raspberry Pi OS Imager, which is available on the raspberrypi.com website. And the second was a manual dd command that does, well, the exact same thing. So hopefully this video was helpful. At this point, your SD card should be ready to go, so you can simply remove it from your card reader, insert it into your Raspberry Pi, and you should be good to go. If this video was helpful, please click that like button. I would really appreciate that, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.